Welcome to Andy Order Vault. Today I have with me this new IEM from KZ. In fact, the flagship IEM recently released. So let's just have a look what's inside this box. Here you can see on AliExpress KZ official store. This DFI in fact came in two different versions. So the one that you are looking at right now, this one, is in fact a non-tunable version, which means that it is a basic model priced at 26 US dollar. But the one that I'm having here in my hand right now is this version, which is priced at 32 US dollar without make. Okay. And in fact, I will not be talking about the basic model, but I'll just be focusing on this because this is the only one that I have right now. So let's just have a look at what's actually inside. As per usual with KZ, in order to keep the price very competitive, in fact affordable, very simple box. The IEM itself, as you can see here, with the normal KZ SPC cable, terminated only in 3.5 mm single-ended. And in fact, if you look at the accessories inside the box, you're gonna see three different type of tips given. And in fact, two of them silicone, the red one, the white ball one, seemingly having some sort of spiral design underneath. And in fact, the other one is the silicone tip normal one. And in fact, this is the one that I use the most all the time. I didn't touch any of those two because I never liked silicone tips. My ear doesn't like it. And in fact, the sound is always better when using foam tips. So I wish KZ could have included a bit more of this foam tip in the future releases. Okay. And here, other than the box itself, you would notice there's a special tool included with this DFI. This tool is in fact similar to your SIM ejector tool. So the reason for that is that because you need to use that tool in order to play around with the switches. So let's just have a look at the build and the construction itself for this IEM. And in fact, this is all metal, very solid, I would say. When I look at the design itself, this is definitely perhaps the most premium looking KZ that I have seen so far. Okay, which is kind of like very elegant. In fact, here when you look at the switches, the design, the way they implement it, it sits very flush, and everything seems to be aligned properly. And in fact, looking at the back here, the design itself is very ergonomic. So meaning to say that I was able to use this KZ DFI for extended period of hours. My ears having no issue at all with fatigue or anything like that. So definitely that is something which is very positive. Okay. So let's just have a look at the configuration itself. This is straight from KZ website. So let's just scroll down here and look at this. All right. As I mentioned earlier, this is a dynamic driver. In fact, what's inside is a 10 mm single dynamic driver, dual cavity. And in fact, if I were to check with another KZ IM, which I have reviewed recently, which I like, ZVX, both seems to be of a similar size, both using dual cavity single dynamic driver. And when I look at the photo itself, in fact, I think they are identical. The only difference is that perhaps the implementation of the driver between those two. So as you can see, even at the sensitivity, they are pretty much very close. ZVX at 109 dB of sensitivity, and this DFI at 110, even more sensitive, just perhaps by 1 or 2 points. Okay, and that is in fact very sensitive because anything above 100 dB of sensitivity is already very sensitive. Okay, and then have a look here. The standard version, the basic version is offered at 23.5 ohm, and in fact this one, the tunable version, will have variable sort of impedance rating, anything from 29 to 48 ohm. But let me show you something about this. As you can see here now, I have actually set it to default, which is everything switch off. You see that? 1, 2, 3, 4, all switch off. And let's check the impedance first for this stock setting. So what I'm going to do now is that use my multimeter And you can see on screen now that it is registering in fact 94.3 ohm at this all position of switches off, all of them, all four, no boosting. All right, so now let's just simply toggle it a bit like this. Switch on number one and switch on number one. Okay, so we have there number one all turn on. And now let's check the impedance for that. Okay, as you can see, it gets lower at 81 ohm now, 0.6. Then we're just gonna go further with switching another one, which is number two now. Switch on as well. And switch on as well for number two. Okay. Now let's check the impedance for this. 1 and 2, all switch on. So, and now the impedance is shown at 68.5. Okay. And then we're just gonna keep on doing that for the third one now. This. Okay. So as you can see, 1, 2, 3 is all up. So let's find out the impedance for that. Okay, gets lower at 58 now. Then we're just gonna switch on everything. All right. When everything is switched on, so I expect a lower count. And true enough, it is now at 38.8 ohm. Okay. With everything switched on, this DFI is in fact still higher than most other IEM at 38 ohm. And in fact, if you switch it off altogether, it is almost 100, as you have seen just now. And I am pretty sure my digital multimeter is accurate because I have used it frequently to measure all other IEM, and I am getting proper reading even from this ZVX here, which is at around 28 ohm. Okay, so and even a few other IEM, so no issue there. So definitely this is something which would require a bit more of power. Okay, and talking about power, before I proceed any further, let me just clarify what are the equipment which I have used to test this KZ DFI. I have with me here this Sony Xperia 1, which is not so powerful. It's under 1 VRMS, which less than probably like around 50 milliwatt of power per channel. And I also have here the most powerful of them all, which is this Venture Electronic Prime Deck together with Runabout. This thing can offer up to 3000 milliwatt of power. Crazy powerful. And of course, I have this Megatron here. And I also have this Hebe FC6, my favorite. And my favorite as well here, DeckPort HD, another powerful dongle, very powerful. And also another very powerful dongle, which is Ovidius B1. So I was able to test this DFI in different type of scenario, and my sound impression afterward will be kind of like reflected on that setting. But now let's just talk about the sound itself and the tuning for this DFI. So let's just have a look here. Let's just scroll up to the graph itself. Okay. As you can see there, all right, there's 5 different type of basic tuning for this DFI. But truth be told, with this kind of switch, it is entirely possible to play with 16 different type of scenario. But the one that matters the most is this 5 tuning aspect here. So when you switch off everything, this button here, 1 until 4, everything off, it is basic level. And remember just now, this basic level is at 94 ohm or almost 95 ohm. And then you can switch on the first button, which is number 1. What it will do is that it will actually increase the sensitivity by 1 dB for lower frequency. And then if you switch 1 and 2, it will bump up another 1 dB, making it total 2 dB of lower frequency boosting. And then if you switch on, right, number 3, you will boost it further, still on lower frequency, up to 3 dB. And when you switch on everything at the lowest impedance, it will offer 4 dB of sensitivity, meaning that when everything is switched on, you're going to get the most loudness coming from this DFI. Okay, now let's talk about the sound itself. How does this DFI sounds like? And to make things simple, because this is highly tunable IEM, and in fact, up until this point, I was just focusing only on 5, tuning aspect of it, probably like 7, right? I did play around with the switches. And the good thing is that it does impart differences between all the switches. So I think the best way to talk about it is that let's just talk about the basic level itself. And remember just now, I shown you that when everything is switched off, practically no boosting or anything like that, it is in fact running at a very high impedance of almost 100 ohm. And when I attach that directly to my phone, which is just like say, like I say again, not so powerful, the output was kind of a bit soft sounding, I would say. Kind of a bit like, say, the dynamic itself, it's okay. It was already good, all right? But because of that requirement of high impedance, my phone wasn't able to fully maximize on the capability of this DFI. And true enough, after I measured it and I found out, wow, almost 100 ohm, immediately I play with the switches and everything. And in fact, as the switches are turned on, right, the impedance goes lower. So which means that it's going to be a bit easier on the source itself. And in fact, scalability of this DFI is simply amazing. Okay, so even push with this super mega powerful Megatron, the best result that I'm getting was in fact when I actually use this switch of 1, 2, 3 switch off, and I only switch on number 4. And when I attach it to something like this prime deck here, this 3000 milliwatt of power from this stack, or even this Megatron, or even this DeckPort HD, OVDS B1, and even this FC6, I am hearing the sort of presentation which is truly mind-blowing. That's the only way that I can put it. Because I was already impressed with the ZVX, the same implementation of this driver previously. What I'm hearing right now is that something which is analytical, resolving, and in fact, the way it handles dynamic is definitely very smooth, mature, and flowing. It just flows from one frequency to another frequency, and in fact, the extension itself is comparable to the higher price IEM which I have used before. So let me just put it this way. Despite the graph here, when you look at it, it's kind of like very V kind of thing, but this is not quite accurate. When I listen to this is definitely edging closer towards being neutral rather than V sounding. Because let's talk about the mid-range itself. The mid-range of this DFI is definitely a bit more forward than a traditional V. It is a bit more pronounced, and in fact, the texture and the definition itself is natural, neutral, and organic. And in fact, it is transparent. Slightly a bit hint of warm, only when I start to toggle with switches number 1, 1 and 2, 1, 2, 3, then it would appear kind of a bit warm sounding. So what I'm trying to say is that if you want to keep it neutral, just switch off everything from 1, 2, 3. Keep number 4 up. And that is, in fact, very close to neutral target territory. So if you like the sort of mid-range or lower frequency, which is kind of like neutral, uncolored, definitely this is the sort of setting that you should use. Again, down, 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 up. Okay? And let's just talk a bit on the treble itself. So this is perhaps another area which is the strength of this DFI. It is very smooth, definitely. And I am hearing proper balance of macro and micro detail. This DFI, especially when powered, with all these very resolving partners, I am really enjoying the sort of resolution that I am hearing. In fact, despite being analytical, it does not sound sharp. it does not exhibit any kind of pinna glare, all right? Even when subjected to, very aggressive instrument attack, or even, picky sort of vocal from people like, Alison Crofts, or soprano type of vocal, or even certain male type of vocal, which is non-baritone type. And in fact, when subjected to like, which is a chesty type of vocal like Diana Krall, contralto, or even baritone for male, it is definitely very transparent up until the peak level of the, upper mid-range to treble range. So what I'm trying to say is that the way it flows between upper mid-range to the treble itself, to the upper frequency, is just fluid. There's no element of aggression or even, let's say, vibrancy, which is what I consider as beyond normal and natural. Okay, now let's talk about the lower frequency of this DFI. As you can see there, with the switches here, in fact, switch number 1 until 3, 1, 2, 3, they are all influencing the bass, the lower frequency, rather than the upper frequency. And in fact, let's just look at switch number 1 itself. Switch number 1, if you turn it on and everything else off, what it will do is that it will boost up the mid bass. And in fact, if you want a bit more of sub bass, then you start to turn on number 2 as well. So you have 1 and 2. What will happen is that you will boost up the sub bass a bit. And then when you want to boost the lower frequency up until, let's say, together with mid bass, sub bass, and lower mid range, then you switch on 1, 2, 3. Okay? And when you want to have everything like boosted, you just switch on everything. So it will be very colored. Again, okay, just to simplify, if you prefer mid bass, you just leave switch number 1 and number 4, and it will become V sounding. And if you love a bit of, sub bass, a bit more of sub bass, in fact, you just switch on 1 and 2 and number 4. So that's how it works. As for the bass itself, it is definitely very clean sounding. I am not hearing, in fact, let me just put it this way. Despite being set at the bassiest setting, this DFI will not satisfy the requirement of people who love their bass big. Okay, this is definitely not a bass head kind of IEM. So in fact, for me, from my standpoint, as somebody who prefer or appreciate neutral sound, this is already very bassy. But for people who love big bass, or people who are familiar with KZ sound previously, they would find that this DFI kind of a bit lacking with the volume of the bass itself, even with the higher setting with lower frequency. Alright, now let's have a look at the most interesting part. How does this DFI scores against my rating system? So let's just have a look at it. As you can see there on screen, okay, from 1 until 10, 10 different categories I have identified. And in fact, remember this, first and foremost, the switch which I use, DDDU, which means that number 1, number 2, number 3, switch off, and I just switch on number 4. Okay? And factor in that I use it with powerful sources. These all magnificent sources that I have here. The sort of sound quality that I'm getting from this DFI is just simply impressive. I am continuously impressed with the sort of tuning which KZ have demonstrated recently. And in fact, I have no issue at all giving it a full score for dynamic presentation. As I mentioned earlier, this is highly resolving yet musical, neutral and natural. Neutral enough, it is still a bit bassy. The extension itself is superb. Tone and timbre balance is definitely spot on. Note weight and density is fairly good for a neutral sounding IM with this setting, okay? Provided that you give it a bit more power. Bass performance is like this. For somebody who loves neutral sound, right? Even though the bass density or even let's say the volume of it is not that humongous, but I love that sort of bass, which is fast, tidy, and very articulate, okay? And again, mid-range performance, again, I am hearing very clear, very resolving, and in fact, neutral and natural sounding mid-range. I love it, okay? As simple as that. And treble performance, just slightly a bit less than the rest, not getting a 9 and 8, because when I compare some of the more resolving IEM which I have, which is also more expensive, okay, it is resolving enough, but I feel that it's kind of a bit, could have been improved a bit, okay. And then soundstage and spatial projection. Okay, this is fairly good with soundstage and spatial projection. Perhaps not so wide sounding, but it is fairly open sounding. So definitely the good definition of space, layering, and in fact, how it resolves different position of sound, the sound source itself. So it is in fact holographic enough even for gaming. I have tested it for gaming, FPS and TPP gaming, definitely no issue there. And definitely score very high with resolution, imaging details, and speed. Very good. Synergy and versatility, kind of a bit okay-ish, for as long as you know that this thing would scale really well with power. If you are comparing it with something which is like, say, 1 BRMS or even anything under 2 BRMS, you're not going to get 100% out of this. All right, perhaps just 80%, No issue with loudness, definitely, but to get the best of it, use highly powerful source. So the total score is at 87 for this DFI. Now that we have the total score, let's find out about comparison. Very important as well. Okay, the first comparison for DFI is definitely with the sibling itself, ZVX. And you probably have seen my video on this. I really love this ZVX, okay? Really love it. I keep it until today, okay? And in fact, when you look at the score, both of them actually score 87 on total. The main difference, let me just describe the difference. Okay, first and foremost, synergy and versatility, as you can see here. All right, ZVX in fact score higher with synergy and versatility because ZVX is a lot easier to drive. And in fact, you can just plug it in anywhere. The performance will be consistent, okay? Even with source like my phone here directly, no issue at all. But DFI, as I mentioned earlier, because of that scaling factor, it will actually sound even better than ZVX as the power goes up due to that high impedance setting. And then resolution and imaging in a perfect setting for this DFI, in fact, it has similar level of resolution to this ATOMOS ER2XR. I kid you not, okay? So, it has some improvement there from the ZVX. As with the rest here, it's pretty much similar up until this point here, note weight and density. So, a manner of saying is that, in fact, this is where ZVX kind of a bit, have an upper hand with just by 1 point. Because when I actually listen to DFI, in fact, it is kind of a bit less with the thickness of the sound itself, with the richness of the sound because of that, hovering more towards being neutral, but also because of that very high impedance. So manner of saying is that it is neutral, but it also kind of like, when I compare directly with this ZVX, I can clearly tell that this ZVX has a bit of richness to the sound itself. Warmer, in fact. Okay. And then, but tone and timbre balance is pretty much similar. But again, this is where also the DFI will have an upper hand as opposed to ZVX with dynamic extension. Because between these two, definitely now that I did mention in my previous review with this ZVX, that it does extend really well, just slightly short when compared to ATOMOS ER2XR. So this is the total score for both of them, both equal at 87, which is definitely a 5-star performer. Okay, and then compare against ATOMOS ER2XR. This is my long-time favorite. Simply put, okay, these two, right, are pretty much still the one which offer a bit more of lower frequency, mass, and density. So, in fact, despite this being the bassiest IEM from ATOMOS, it has lower volume when it comes to bass in terms of, size and, the presentation itself. But quality-wise, they are pretty much identical, all three of them. So if you want a bit more of bassy performance, I would still recommend ZVX over DFI. Okay, and again, this ER2XR is definitely a bit more bold in the way it presents the resolution itself. In fact, when I compare side by side between DFI and this ER2XR, I can clearly hear that, you know, the focus for this ER2XR is still on being crisp edge of sound, meaning that it is a bit sharper in a way. So if you want a bit more of smoothness, just imagine this. Tone down a bit of that attack, tone down a bit of that, you know, aggression, especially on the upper mid-range and, you know, upper frequency, then you will get DFI, okay? So, depending on your need, perhaps some people would say that I prefer a bit more of resolution on the upper frequency, a bit of, you know, more pronounced macro detail especially. Then this ER2XR is still superior in that regard. But if you want a bit more of, let's say, moderation, a bit more of dampening, so that you can listen to highly aggressive or energetic music, then this DFI would be a lot more suitable together with this ZVX. All right, let's just wrap things up for this KZ DFI. And in order to do that, let me just reflect a bit on the progression of KZ within the last 1 year. I have in fact tested quite a lot of KZ IEM within that period of time. In fact, I lost count. And just to be fair, I have not always been, you know, favorable to KZ. I am among one of the critics of KZ. And in fact, I can show you here. One of the first critique that I have with KZ last year was in fact with this KZ Zex Pro, right? I gave it just 3.5 star. And in fact, that's being merciful. Okay. I don't like it. As simple as that. Okay. And then the next one, which I reviewed after that, was somewhere in June last year. KZ, in fact, released this ESX model that is supposed to be their 10th anniversary. And you know what? That KZ was really terrible sounding. I gave it 3 star out of 5. And that is just kind of like, you know, being merciful. Okay. And I did mention here in my review, right, that I do hope, right, that KZ will continue to make great budget-oriented IM, and the learning curve for them will only get better with time. You see that? I mentioned that somewhere in June. And you want to know what? KZ have been going through a lot. And in fact, there's another IM which I don't like, which is this Zest. I really don't like this IM to a point that I decided not to put up any review on it, because if I do put up a review on it, that would be like 2.5 star, not even 3 star, even worse. So I said, okay, forget it. I'm just not going to do it. I just like, you know, somewhere around, I don't know where. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is that KZ has been the subject of quite a bit of critique, you know, in the last 1 year. And just to be fair, I think the admirable thing about them is that despite all those pitfalls, they never gave up. Okay, they continue to innovate, they continue to find way to actually improve. So as a result of that, starting with the likes of, let's say, CCA, CXS, I am hearing huge improvement. You know, KZ dare to step beyond their comfort zone, you know, of doing some tuning which is different, really touching into hi-fi sort of territory. And in fact, this DFI and ZVX prove that being patient, being diligent pays off. So there you have it. Thank you for staying with me until the end of the video. I hope that has been informational and fun. I enjoy this. I love this. Okay. And hope to see you soon.